Hello, Canada. Hello, United States of America. Greetings to all of you here with me in Panama and all over the planet. My name is KevinJJohnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show that runs every single Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Oh, we want to say welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here once again. I will not be doing my 15-minute diatribe. I will not be telling you funny stories or anecdotal tales. We're going to dive right into our guests today. We've got Rob Anders joining us right now. And also we've got a special guest I'm going to introduce you to in just a couple of minutes here. Rob, great to see you once again. Tell everybody who you are and why they must care as much as I do, please.
Well, I was a member of Parliament for over 18 years in Ottawa, first the Reform Party, then the Canadian Alliance, and then finally the Conservative Party federally. And I've gone down the rabbit hole of central bank digital currency, and I'm very concerned about the control that will give government over individuals' lives, etc. And you can just look up the quotes of Mark Carney to figure out where he wants to take stuff. Oh, yeah. It's very dangerous. And our next guy that you're going to introduce is one of these bankers in Alberta who I think really understands. And we swap some emails back and forth type of thing about where we think this is all going.
Well, let's just introduce him right now, shall we? Brett Oland from Bow Valley Credit Union in Alberta. Welcome to the show for the first time. It is a great pleasure to finally see you face to face.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, tell everybody here what Bow Valley Credit Union is and how it's different from a federal bank. And then we're going to dive right into my questions. Go ahead.
Oh, boy, open a can of worms there. Okay, Bow Valley Credit Union based in Alberta. We've got about 600 million in assets, which is small relative to the bigger banks, especially in the U.S. We are a credit union, which means that we are membership owned, so we're not driven by shareholder demands. Specifically, the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, the State Streets of the world, and specifically in Alberta, we're regulated differently. So we're regulated provincially, which our province definitely has more a freedom mindset in mind than the Ottawa mindset, which regulate the bigger banks in Canada. Specifically, Bow Valley Credit Union, we're well known for pushing back against the COVID mandates for vaccination. We never forced anybody to take any vaccinations. We feel that's a health decision that should be made on behalf of an individual, and it's not up to corporate organizations or governments to make that decision. Secondly, we're pretty well known for very much pushing back against Ottawa. During the Freedom Convoy, we refused to close anybody's accounts that were associated with that, which a lot of the bigger banks across Canada were forced to do that. And then thirdly, we're pretty well known for our stance on hard money, specifically gold and silver, and we're starting to tread our way into Bitcoin. So.
Whoa, okay, that's quite the mouthful. And what I find here is that Bow Valley, I lived in the province of Alberta from 2021 to 2023, and everyone knows who you are. So congratulations on that. In fact, most people say, hey, try Bow Valley if you're tired of the big sticks. So there we go. Rob, the reason we're having tonight's show is you sent me an email, which it caught my eye because it says Texas and mints own coins. Let's talk about what Texas is doing. Please go ahead.
Sure. So they have a bill that's been drafted and will be before the Texas legislature. And it basically is to go back to what they call constitutional money. Texas is unique in many ways. I mean, not only is it a large, powerful state, I think it would be the 6th largest economy in the world if it was on its own type of thing. So it's a powerhouse. But, when it won the War of Independence vis-a-vis the Spanish Empire / Mexico, it was a much larger state than it is now. It actually went all the way up to Wyoming. And so when it finally got admitted to the United States as a state, and Sam Houston went from being president of the Republic of Texas to being a governor and then later on a senator, et cetera, whatever, in Texas history, I think it was in 1846, what happened was Texas became a little bit smaller, lost some of those territories to the north, which some people were talking about naming, and those names came to fruition in the future, like Washington or Colorado or whatever, right? So Texas has the ability constitutionally to split into 5 separate states still to this day. And what that would mean is that all of a sudden, rather than having 2 people in the Senate, that territory would have 10 people in the Senate, and it would increase the electoral college votes by 8. And obviously that would be like probably 8 more Republicans, you know, for Republican president like Donald Trump, et cetera. So it has a very unique situation. The foundational documents of the United States stipulate gold and silver as money, as currency, is valid. And so what Texas is doing, what one of these state legislators is doing, is basically reverting back to that and saying pre-Federal Reserve, after the turn of the century, after John Pierpont Rockefeller passed away, that you know, basically they're going back to real solid money. So you know, Brett and I have talked about this, where in Alberta we have these provincially regulated financial institutions. His is one of those. I would like to see the Alberta government change it up so that the mandate, if you will, is to have those institutions take on a percentage of gold, silver. One might even toss in oil, you know, et cetera, as a way to bolster the assets. Because I frankly don't trust Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney with the direction that they want to go with regard to central bank digital currency and their spending. So anyhow, that's just a thumbnail sketch.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, Brett, over to you. Is a Bow Valley Credit Union. I know that we don't get taught anything in school about money, finance, mortgages, even how to shake hands or create a resume. These are not things you get taught in high school. So by the time kids are 18, they've wasted pretty much 14 years of that 18 years learning nothing, in fact. So could you educate the entire populace now as to what a credit union is versus a bank? Please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I touched on a little bit of it earlier. So first and foremost is we're shareholder owned, or member owned versus shareholder owned. And so our members are within our communities of Alberta. We're only regulated to operate within Alberta. And that means that there's not a shareholder off in a far off land dictating to the board of directors a direction that it should go. That often happens in the bigger banks, especially in Canada, where there's foreign interests that own, say, RBC, Royal Canadian Bank. And you can look, it's public knowledge that you look at the shareholders of these corporations, and a lot of the time it's BlackRock or Vanguard or State Street, which is very different value proposition than what a member of a credit union has. And so inherently, when you're a member, actually an owner of your financial institution, you take it a little more seriously, and you want your money to be a little safer in an organization like that. So as a member, you can vote for the board of directors as well as the bylaws of the organization to basically dictate direction of the organization. So now let me ask you this: when's the last time have you been able to tap a board of director of a big bank on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm pretty concerned about something like this? And the answer is just never.
No, you're the first. You're the first one in, I guess we'll say, a head office to ever return an email of mine. The first. Normally I get some regional plebe who doesn't speak English typing up horrible letters. They don't even spell check them and send them to me. So thank you for that. No, you don't get to talk to anyone. But I find, and I want to get both your opinions on this one. I find that's actually quite the Canadian phenomenon. After being in Panama now for 8 months, I can walk into any bank here and just talk with managers and make deals with the banks. I've had the opportunity to meet with the mayors now of the 3 biggest cities in the country. So you have access to politicians here. You have access to banks that want to do business. And then I noticed there's a lot of, in the United States, a lot of state-run banks where you can talk to the board of directors. Glacier Bank is one of them in Montana, for example. I had that conversation today. So why is it that banks around the world, you can talk to the upper echelon, and in Canadian banks, you can't talk to anyone? What's going on there? Rob, I'll give that to you first.
I'm just a politician as opposed to the banker, but I think part of it is because we have less competition. We in Canada, when you think about it, on the federal level, you have these chartered banks, and there's a half dozen of them. And so, in the United States, there's a greater proliferation of banks. And I think that, I'm a big fan of the provincially regulated chartered stuff because, I've had my run-ins with the CRA, as we've talked about on the show before. And, and the big banks just jump and do whatever they want them to do type of thing, regardless of whether or not there's, sanctioned by a judge or whatever. So I exclusively bank with provincially regulated institutions now. I won't even touch the federal ones as best as possible. So I think it's partly that we don't have as much competition as we should. Like, I want to stress as well, like Canada used to be, and this is something to be proud of. I mean, we have, we're not proud of Trudeau or Carney or a lot of the mayhem that's going on now. But from 1817 until 1914, we had the longest running free banking system in the world. And we were an example, actually, to the United States when Polk was running for president in the 1840s, et cetera, when he was running against central banks. And, so for that length of time, those institutions, and a lot of them were actually, because, 1817 predates 1865, those were banks, a lot of them that were actually chartered by their colonies. So you think of the Bank of Nova Scotia, you think of Toronto Dominion, you think of Bank of Montreal. Okay, a lot of these were actually colonial, provincial at that time, or colonial became provincial institutions, and that currency, when they held gold or silver in reserve, was traded as far down south as the Caribbean and as far east as Great Britain. Was respected in the United States. So we actually were an example of what Polk was talking about when he was running for president in the 1840s about getting rid of the central bank. Right, okay. Because he actually had a self-regulating, in a sense, independent, private currency system. It was beautiful, and so anyhow, I think we've drifted so far from that ideal. Canada used to have 2,500 tons of gold. This is back in the 1960s. If we'd held on to that, we would be the third largest reserve of gold in the world after, like the United States, for example. And I think it's Russia or China that would come back after that, but maybe Italy now. Anyhow, but yeah, it's just I think we've lost the sense of competition, and it's been overregulated, I think.
All right, and Brett, I want to get your thoughts as somebody who's in banking. Why is it that we can't talk to anybody in the upper echelon of banking in Canada?
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Rob that it's called a monopolistic oligopoly in Canada. So, effectively we have very few bigger banks that control 83% of the Canadian banking system. And then you have these smatters of credit unions. There's only about 200 in Canada. Compared to the United States, where they have over 6,000 banks that you can choose from. So there's definitely that piece where there's lack of options. And what's really troubling to me is in Soviet Russia, there was one central bank and there was one commercial bank. And so basically, if you got debanked by the commercial bank or the central bank, effectively you were done. And so when you see something like almost a monopoly like there is in Canada, and the central bank, the government, and the commercial banks start to get closer and closer and closer together with the way they're talking on the same song sheet, it gets to be very troubling. Like, you can see the direction that something like this is going. Right.
I want to toss into something that Brett's talked about there, and I know, for example, I took in a presentation that he did in Cochrane, where the head office for their bank is, and he mentioned Gazbank, and I was like, this guy gets it, because when Lenin nationalized the banks in 1917 in Russia, then the Soviet Union, whatever, what happened was they had it was easier to nationalize the banks in Russia than it would be. Sorry, it's easier to nationalize the banks in Canada today than it would be in Russia and the Soviet Union in 1917. In other words, they had more banks with a greater dispersion of assets in 1917. So you imagine the type of control that was when they created Gauze Bank. Canada, because we have so few of these massive federally chartered banks, it actually is less banks with a greater percentage of the assets. It would actually be easier than what happened in 1917 in the Soviet Union.
That's frightening when you stop and think about it. Yeah, for sure. All right, so this is the question I've got, and it's a big one. Being here in Panama, I'm helping a lot of Canadians get their money out of Canada into Panama. I'm also helping them move money into the United States. I'm helping Ontarians move to Bow Valley in Alberta. Here's one of the issues: is the banks here. There's 52 major banks in Panama. There are 3 credit unions. The Canadian bank system, at least the federals, will not allow you to transfer money. Banks in Costa Rica, Mexico, Honduras, Panama, possibly even Brazil. And the banks around the world are saying, you know what, we're not dealing with Canada anymore. It's become a joke. So, Brett, I'll put this to you, is why are Canadian banks not allowing Canadians to buy crypto and move money around the world, even for investment?
Well, it stems back to around the year 2000, 2001. And if you remember, that was the terrible day that the Twin Towers went down on September 11th, 2001. And suspiciously, very quickly after the towers went down, in Canada and around the world, they talked about a lot of these anti-terrorist mandates that, well, if we cut off the funding to these terrorists, then we'll be able to stop terrorism altogether. And it's always, they put in these rules always, it's for your safety and security is really where it starts. And that was sort of the impetus of what we call FinTrack in Alberta. And FinTrack is basically the oversight body. And at the time in 2001, I don't think anybody complained that it came in and that it was going to surveil basically people's bank accounts. And FinTrack is a fairly benign organization, and really what it does is basically tracks people's information. So if money's coming in or out of a bank account, as a financial institution, a lot of the time we have to report on it. But often FinTrack comes up with these rules. And so if there's rules, say you own a car wash, or you deal in cryptocurrency, or you're, dealing in drugs, or whatever it is, like there's all these rules around FinTrack, and those rules just continue to expand. And so what they do is specifically blacklist a lot of countries around the world, and basically say, you know what, they're not your traditional country that does business, and so we're going to basically blacklist them, and we're not going to wire any money to them, type thing. So I'm certain that there's ways that you could find around it by finding an intermediary bank in the U.S., which I'm sure you figured out, Kevin. But yes, they don't make it particularly easy, and that it's not a surprise that they're dealing with very cash intensive businesses. They're dealing with crypto where you can move money without surveillance, money exchanges, all these things that they seem to be very clamped down under the rouge of basically your safety and security, because we're going to protect you from the bad guys, which of course, I think anybody on this channel would understand with their eyes wide open what the real objective is. So,
well, I certainly think so. Yeah.
I just like, to chime in about how, terrorism, morphed into opposing the truckers and COVID mandates and all that type of stuff. And if you're opposed to the green agenda and, 2030 and 15-minute cities and all that type of stuff, or if you just have a larger carbon footprint or you don't agree with diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera, like that's where that stuff's morphed into. It's very sad.
Yep. And you can call anybody a terrorist now, like those truckers that went to Ottawa, you're a terrorist. So then basically it activates this next set of rules where you can basically take away all their rights and freedoms, right? So,
well, which is exactly what happened, but it's also putting the fear into everybody nationwide. The trucker convoy goes out there, does the right thing, helps Canadians get their lives back. But the penalty is that A, you get trampled by horses, RCMP horses, and B, you get your bank account shut down. That terrified the average Canadian. So where people were afraid of the Canada Revenue Agency and the government before, now they are purely terrified. And I know this because I do taxes for people, and everyone's terrified. But FinTrack, maybe I'll let you guys decide who's going to answer this one first. Wow, FinTrack got involved with the crypto market. So you had companies like Coinberry, which is now BitBuy. Then you also had ShakePay, and now you've got Kevin O'Leary getting into it with WonderFi and a couple of other projects. But I used to be able to buy $50,000 worth of Bitcoin and just move it wherever I wanted. Now, if it's over $3,000 that I purchase and move, FinTrack is either contacting me through letters to my address, or they're contacting the exchange I'm buying from. So first off, why do they care about $3,000 transactions, and what can they do to enforce their will? Go ahead.
I'll let Brett handle this. I'm less experienced with the crypto stuff.
Go for it.
Well,
right.
you know, interestingly enough, when they first implemented FinTrack, it was any transaction over $10,000 is what they were concerned about. And so if you think about that, that was the better part of 24 years ago. And so inflation's just eaten that $10,000 alive, and you know, that's more more or less. And they keep on lowering that rate of you know, in your case, they say anything $3,000. At one point, FinTrack came to us and said, we want you to track all cash transactions. And thankfully, a lot of the big banks and financial institutions pushed back and said, listen, we can't do business like this. It's impossible to do that. So part of the challenge with is, I'm not understanding why they're doing it other than to basically gain more control. And a bigger, more scary thing that probably we should be concerned with is in March of 2023 budget at the federal level, they threw a whole bunch more money in the millions of dollars at FinTrack to basically soup up its connection to AI, so it can do a lot of this tracking for them. Built up connections between the RCMP, which are like the local or the federal police here in Canada. And so like, and these connections just, it's hard not to think that they're going down to a nefarious place with all these things happening when they're basically sharpening these tools in the background. So,
okay, so I'm just being asked what FinTrack is. Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada. Yeah, just nosy individuals that want to know everything that you're doing. I'll just tell the two of you gentlemen what I had to experience. It was 3 years ago where someone who didn't like me called FinTrack, but also the Alberta Securities Commission, to make the statement that I was openly selling crypto on the market without a license. Now, I had no idea there was any such thing you needed, but I'm asking the question, where would I get servers to do this from? Really? So when the Alberta Securities Commission sent me a letter, they told me what I was accused of, and they said that I had to turn over all the marketing materials I've ever used, the full names of everybody that I work with for the corporation that they said I was representing, my full name, bank statements for everyone for 6 months, home phone numbers, the whole 9 yards. So I called my lawyer. I said, could you please just deal with this? But why would the Securities Commission and FinTrack be sending out letters like that?
well, in my mind, they're terrified of cryptocurrency and the power of the system. And so I'm relatively new to the space and learning about it more and more every day. But I'm seeing what crypto can do already with some of these apps. And the governments really should be terrified. If they want to maintain control of the financial system, the crypto will destroy it. And crypto is faster, it's better, it's a better store of value, it's more private.
Yes.
You know, you name it, you go down the list of these things, and they if you think of money as power and control, they quickly realize that they'll lose it if the world moves towards something like a cryptocurrency.
I just wanted to chime in and say that I sent out something today where Mark Carney, just blasé, talks about wanting to control $150 trillion to target that money, private money, toward his green, Agenda 2030, et cetera, whatever stuff, right? Their green agenda. Now, when you think about that, that's 100 times Canada's national debt. That's over four times the national debt of the United States. Like, what type of control freak do you have to be where you want to have taps and levers and controls and fines and penalties on 150 trillion private dollars to make sure that your agenda gets accomplished with regard to the green stuff? Like, it's all about control. It's just so nasty.
Yeah. What exactly will this control get them? I mean, there's only so much money you can have and only so much you can spend. I mean, does anyone have any idea why they want this kind of control and what the plan is with it?
If I may just jump in there, I think Brett and I could both give you like 100 different answers to that. But the one that I think just boils it right down is look at China. Look at the digital yuan. And if you realize in China, if you criticize the government, you can't get a plane ticket, a train ticket, a bus ticket. Right. You can't apply for a government job. They can make your money expire within a certain amount of time. You've got to spend it how they want you to spend it. And if you don't, it disappears. Like, it's all about that control. So like, there's all sorts of facets to this, but I think that China is the easiest way to understand what some of these control freaks want.
Yeah, positively. And Brett, just to reflect on what you were saying about crypto, we're doing taxes, like we're doing a lot of taxes for a lot of people in Canada, some in the United States as well, buying and selling corporations. And the truth is, some of the amounts that we bring in surpass $50,000 to $100,000 per transaction. I'd rather have it in crypto. I really don't. I don't want Canadian dollars anymore. And if I was given the choice between $1 million in Bitcoin and $1 million US, I would take the Bitcoin. I've seen the power of the crypto market, and I had an opportunity to talk to a number of individuals, real hardcore crypto people in Costa Rica and in Mexico. And what you're dealing with is millennials. I don't agree with their left-wing politics, but the younger generation under 40 understands crypto pretty implicitly. And they're buying houses with it, and they're doing investments with it. They're buying private jets with it. It's an incredible system. So now I guess the question would be, how would Bow Valley Credit Union or provincially chartered banks like yours get into this market and profit off of it?
Well, and this fundamentally goes back about 3 years, and a lot of what we're talking about here, central bank digital currencies, government control. I think a big piece that we're going to have to worry about over the next decade is inflation. And so the devaluation of specifically the Canadian dollar in our case, but I don't think anybody should be blind to the fact that with the new Trump administration coming in, a lot of what he's proposing is going to be massively inflationary. And I think you have to pay attention to what he's saying of putting tariffs on all the countries around the world. Don't move away from the US dollar. Effectively, what I think Trump is trying to do is trap people in US currency, whether you love him, hate him, or an indifferent with Trump. What he wants to do is get the debt of the United States under control. And to be able to do that, he basically has to inflate the US dollar to high heaven. And so what we're trying to do as an organization is make people aware for educational purposes that we think that inflation is coming and it's coming to stay, and get into hard assets. And so we talked a little bit about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. We're pretty big proponents of gold and silver that have throughout history been very good protectors of wealth, as well as other hard assets. We're talking land, we're talking housing, we're talking apartment buildings. Anything that you can drop hurts your foot is effectively what you want to be into. And the last thing that you want to be into is like sovereign debt, like sovereign bonds. and low interest paying accounts and things like that, because they're just going to get wiped out over the next number of years. So,
yeah, actually, speaking of low interest accounts, maybe you could reflect on this one quickly. I made a presentation to the mayor of Panama City. We were talking about banking. One of the big things I really want to flog is banking here. Everyone knows Panama for the canal and nothing else, right? So I said, we got to market this city. The city's got incredible technology, 35-cent subway rides. The subway is better than Toronto and New York's combined. The infrastructure is here. Let's market what we have. And then I said, look, you've got some banks that'll pay starting off at 3%, but they go as high as 12 if you put the right amount of money in and lock it down for the right amount of time. And then I showed him TD Bank from $0 to $1,000, 0.01%. $1 million, 0.01%. And they're all, what? What's going on in Canada? We thought Canada was rich. Thinking, no, I told the truth about it. But what is it that's driving Canadian banks to pay nothing in interest while they rake in billions every quarter? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rob, if you've...
Well, I guess you get away with what you can get away with, right? And so if you can do that, you do it. I wanted to touch on this idea of, crypto and commodity-backed currency. I'm a believer in commodity-backed currency. I agree with Milton Friedman. I think he gave the best description of the gold standard, et cetera, that I've ever seen. I like private crypto better than I like central bank digital currency crypto or whatever, right? Because that gives the government gobs and gobs and gobs of control. I know a friend of mine who's an energy trader for Royal Dutch Shell said that there was some other system that Cato Institute had talked about, but he didn't know the details, et cetera. But I think it's hard to beat a commodity-based currency. First the world started off with barley in like Mesopotamia for about 2,000 years. Then it went to gold at around 500 BC, and then eventually silver, and then copper. Various countries, whether the Roman Empire, the Chinese, messed with copper, and the final one, kind of with the petrodollar in Saudi Arabia and the United States, with oil. Those are the five. And I know that Holland dabbled with tulips and other places with seashells and salt and whatever. But I think those five things, those five commodities I just talked about, are money, and gold is the king of them. So I'm a big fan of that. I think that thousands of years of recorded history since Herodotus, kind of prove it.
Yeah, and you actually see in societies like that is the lower classes actually do much better because they're compensated properly. There's a phenomenon called Triffin's dilemma, where basically whoever prints the money gets access to it first and then doesn't have to feel the consequences of the inflation. So of course the government prints the money, they're the closest to it, and the politicians, and so they spit it out into the economy, and by the time it gets down to your blue collar worker, that devaluation has already happened. And so commodity-backed currencies effectively prevent that from happening because you can't print oil, you can't print gold, you can't print wheat. And so they can't get away with this nonsense. And just sort of talking about your earlier question there, Kevin, it's this phenomenon of free money that's happening in Canada, in the Western world over the last couple of years. It's basically the social elites at the top funding their stupid agendas. And I think we start to see it in society. And when you have free money and there's sort of lack of proper compensation for all the workers, you're going to see things like prostitution, drug problems, funding of ridiculous organizations, painting rainbow sidewalks, you name it. Like it's like that you're just going to see all this malinvestment throughout society that would not happen if you actually paid people properly and weren't devaluing the currency constantly. So
Rob, I got a question and answer here in the TikTok room. Joseph, if you want concrete tools and strategies on how to transfer assets and wealth here to Panama, get a hold of me on my personal website. My name, KevinJJohnston.com. Could everybody please type that in the room, and same over here on Kick? I appreciate that. By the way, guys, Look at the free information you're getting. It's amazing. Why are there only 2,300 likes right there? Could you all start going like double tap, 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 tap? Just launch it. Same over here on Kick, please. We've got 6,000. Get everyone liking it, please. It helps the algorithm find us. Oh, and everyone see that good-looking guy on the other side of the screen there, Brett? Directly below him is that symbol. It's a thumbs up. So click it, please. It helps us gain traction in the algorithm. Rob, you're up. Go ahead.
Sure. I was just going to say that, when I first got elected back in the 90s, the candidate's debt was around, $600 billion, et cetera. And I wondered if in my time as a member of parliament, my lifetime, we would cross into the trillions territory. Justin Trudeau alone has put $1 trillion onto the national debt. I mean, it's mind-boggling. $1 billion alone he was, putting off to the We charity. Brett was just talking about these little pet projects and everything else. I understand some of that was to go and actually subsidize, his wife because she had issues with his lifestyle and whatever. And that was a way to kind of do some back payments. It's just disgusting the way some of this money has just been blown away. And of course, it's going to cause inflation. You can't just dump $1 trillion, of government debt into the Canadian economy and not expect there's going to be consequences, right? Disgusting.
Well, part of the consequences that we're learning now is the Canada Revenue Agency has been given a mandate to collect as much money as they can, any way possible. So they are assessing people who make $20,000 a year at $50,000 a year of taxes. I know this because I'm seeing these letters on a regular basis. So it's forcing everyone to do either improper or illegal things. And I doubt very much deliberately assessing someone's taxes at more than double what they make has got to be illegal. It has to be. So, yeah, for sure. Brett, you mentioned earlier in the show that you did not cooperate with the government when it came to shutting down bank accounts of truckers at the convoy. Could you explain what it is that led you to that? Is there a mandate because you're provincially chartered that allows you to ignore the Fed? Go ahead.
Well, that's part of it. So we're regulated differently. So we're regulated provincially versus federally. But this actually fell under back to FinTrack again, that tool that they seem to be sharpening. And if you know much about Canada, the Deputy Prime Minister, second in command in Canada, her name is Chrystia Freeland. And she is also in charge of the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions and FinTrack. And so basically, very politically driven person that basically forced the hand of the federally regulated banks to shut things down. But what was really interesting is that within hours of her getting up on the podium and talking about, we're going to enact what's called the Emergencies Act and shut down people's bank accounts and things like that, these banks are actually started doing it. So they had advance notice that something was happening in this regard. And we made the conscious decision with it. If we get this order, we're going to push back against it. And we're going to fight it in the courts. And we didn't receive one letter. We didn't receive one email. We didn't receive one phone call to do that. And what was really baffling is, as far as I know, no other financial institution did. They did it as a wink and a nod, and the Deputy Prime Minister standing at a podium saying we're shutting down people's accounts. So unless I'm missing something behind the scenes, just unbelievable,
Well, no, actually, what you said makes sense. Wow. Okay, I'm blown away. So I'm going to formulate this statement in question properly here. What you said makes perfect sense, because they knew that the CEOs of the 6 big federal banks would go along with it. But they probably had a feeling that the smaller institutions like yours would ignore them or fight back or get a court order of your own to counter it. So it sounds to me like this was not a court order. It was just a phone call made in a backroom deal. Is that pretty much what it was?
Well, that's what I suspect. And that's what I mean by these banks and the government and the central bank getting closer and closer together. These organizations like the central bank and the commercial bank and the government are supposed to be very distinct, separate organizations, and they're for good reason, because they don't want that malinvestment. They don't want a communist society. But the thing is, as we see those get closer and closer together, you start to see these problems like this. And it's that backroom phone call that's, just close down all these truckers' accounts, would you? And no problem.
One of these things I find disturbing about this, and Brett's really touched on this, is that the more that the central banks dance the government's tune and do what they want them to do and are complicit with the agenda, whether it's central bank digital currency or whatever, the less there is the need for them, right? Like if you've got a federal government that basically dictates credit and dictates who can get what in terms of financing because of its rules, and if you generate too much carbon or you don't jump to the tune of diversity, equity, inclusion, you're not going to get credit, etc. The oil and gas sector gets shut down, whatever. Like you become irrelevant, right? Because you no longer are a separate financial institution. You don't make independent decisions, and God forbid you have politicians that become the bankers, right? Because all they care about is the next election. Like you think Justin Trudeau cares about whether or not you have capacity to pay? Like it's a joke.
Yep. And you start seeing things like recently in Canada, your viewers around the country or the world might not know this, but they're removing the GST on some items in Canada. So the GST is a tax that's put on products and services around Canada. And they've decided for 2 months they're going to remove the GST on some products and some services. So to me, that is picking winners and losers. And that's exactly what a communist or government does, is picks winners and losers within products and services in society.
That's also frightening. And Brett, I wanted to go back because, I mean, you know this as much as anyone does, is this idea of banks cooperating with the Canadian government without court orders. The Canada Revenue Agency, for example, you actually are the one that pointed out Section 317 of the Excise Tax Act to me, which I went through, where the Canada Revenue Agency, if they're not able to get you to cooperate with them, what they'll do is they'll issue a letter, which is called a requirement to pay, to the banks. And then if the banks don't do it, all it says in the Tax Act there, Section 317, is that they'll be held liable. So the banks in Canada say, oh, well, we got a requirement to pay letter. We will give the CRA the money. So it's not that the CRA people has access to your bank account. It's the banks that actually give it over. But Brett, I had a great conversation with a gentleman that works for the CRA. I'm actually going to release the audio track soon as my lawyer says it's okay. And this guy, he was nice. He was polite. We were actually very nice to each other on the phone. But he says the following: the CRA does not sue people because we do not want to set a precedent of losing. He said this. He also said that they don't file criminal charges because they can't make money on that. They don't seize properties unless it's an absolute guaranteed slam dunk win that they have case law to back them on, because it costs too much money to try to get somebody's house. Mm-hmm. So if the CRA is making statements like this, what are the banks afraid of if they just tell the CRA, no, we're not going to give people's money to you anymore? If you don't mind, I'd like to just delve into that. There are so many people who are scared of their audits and scared of, I mean, the CRA is now 59,000 employees. It's bigger than the Department of National Defense. It's bigger than Canada Post. Okay, that's ridiculous. We have 8 times the number of people working for the CRA that the United States does in the IRS per capita. We have 10 times the number of people working in the CRA that Germany does per capita. It's outrageous. And I want to tell a story about David Elderfield. He's a fellow that I know. He ran a company called Wayfair Identifiers. And back after 9/11, when the Twin Towers, Pentagon, etc., got hit, he came up with a system that could identify the contents of 95% of the sea cans, the containers that were coming in. And you take this thing, you put on the side of these things with a spectrometer. It can determine parts per trillion of whether or not there's drugs or explosives or human cargo, etc. Right now, only 5% of the shipping containers get checked. Okay. Now, China took an interest in this. Surprise, surprise, because they're involved with fentanyl and opium and human trafficking and all that stuff.
So they pretended as though they took an interest in it. Well, within days of China making an offer, etc., all of a sudden the CRA pressured the banks, and this poor guy got shut down. He was going to do a sale to an American company worth, I think it was $14 million US, or at the time about $20 million Canadian. Canadian Border Services loved what he was doing. Homeland Security loved what he was doing. And this poor guy got shut down, and his system was better than ArriveCan. Okay. And now the government's talking about throwing away a huge chunk of money on ArriveCan 2.0, which is going to allow smugglers to identify people crossing the border, when they're going to be there, what vehicle they're driving, what their telephone number is, so they can track it, etc. And load a Lexus bumper, full of drugs, and then pick it up on the other side. And the government's thing was, when he did Wayfair identifiers, they said they didn't want to pick winners and losers. Well, here you've got this government. You've got people tied to the Liberal Party who were getting hundreds of times the amount of money that Wayfair identifiers was going to be allocated or whatever. And it's ridiculous. Like there's so much feather bedding and corruption, and the idea that we would allow more of this carte blanche is ridiculous. Anyhow, sorry, that's my rant.
Oh, of course. So, Brett, why are the banks not just saying forget about it? Because when I read the Excise Tax Act, here's what it gets really interesting about the act versus the law. Whenever I look at criminal law, for example, there's always a punishment for something that you do wrong. But in any of the tax acts, there's no punishment. It just says you'll be held liable, which means we're going to get really mad and shake our finger. And that's it, because they only have 50 lawyers for the entire country, the CRA. They're all provided through the Department of Justice. They don't sue. Is there a way that we could get the banks, financial institutions, employers to just say no to the CRA?
Well, it's a really good question, and honestly, I don't have a good answer for you other than the precedent's sort of been set, and I guess it's sort of where do you draw the line too? We get demands not just from the CRA, but we also get child support demands and things like that. So right. The thing is, does child support demand make sense? Yeah, personally, I believe in that type of thing. Whether you do or not is a different case, and so I really don't have a good answer, but it's a good conversation to have, and maybe we need to think that through of like what are the repercussions of something like this of the CRA coming down on you? I don't know. I've never been bold enough to try it. So,
well, and that's a fair answer. Absolutely a fair answer. All right. So,
because it's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. This is why Alberta should seriously be looking at having its own revenue agency, right? The idea that you give that much control to Trudeau and one of his ministers, they don't even listen to the ombudsman. In David Elderfield's case, the ombudsman did the highest, level of reprimand he could do to demand an apology from the CRA, and they still didn't do that, right? It's ridiculous what they get away with, and the idea that Alberta, or any other province would roll over and let them have this much control, it shouldn't be.
Well, you see, actually, I agree with that. And then based on the fact that earlier in the show, we talked about Texas minting its own coins and possibly currency. The province of Alberta, for those who don't know, around the world, in Canada, there's 10 provinces, which essentially are independent countries that work under the banner of the Dominion of Canada, all trying to get free stuff from each other. But Alberta has oil and beef and trees and water, beaver pelts. We got it all. Alberta does have it all. It could be an independent country just on the oil alone. So do you gentlemen think that there is a way for Alberta to have its own minted coins and, like you said, its own revenue agency where all the money, actually, could Alberta be its own country? Let's go through all three of those.
Brett, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to maybe address this first and then turn it over to you because of what you guys are doing. Okay.
Sure.
Because Brett's really tackling this in a head-on way. So I would like to see the Alberta regulated financial institutions have a peg. It could be 1% to start off, then 2, then 3% of assets in, say, for example, gold, silver, oil. Okay, I know I was approached by somebody, I won't mention who, but I know they have connections to the premier, who was talking about Alberta having a crypto that could be convertible into hard assets like gold, silver, oil. Now, Alberta is probably best situated in terms of oil because, we produce millions of barrels, etc. We have a little bit of gold, but not much. And anyhow, so oil is the easiest one, I think, in terms of that. But Brett is talking about having not a government sanctioned version or something done by the government of Alberta or even by a very Alberta regulated institution like the Alberta Treasury Branch, but they've kind of got their own idea. So Brett, over to you.
Sure, yeah, and probably the best way to explain this is what we talked about earlier. Rob, you mentioned the free banking system, and effectively those banks way back in the day had those reserves. They had those tangible assets, and so there's basically 4 types of banking systems. There's for this case, we'll use gold. So there's people can exchange their wealth and their store of value in gold. And we soon move to a receipt-based system. So it's like, okay, the gold is in the vault. I'm just going to give you this piece of paper that says we're transferring gold back and forth. And then we moved to a fractional reserve system where it was just fractions of that actual gold in the vaults. And now we're in a system which is basically a complete fiat system, and there's nothing really tangibly backing it. We at Bow Valley Credit Union want to move that back down the scale. And so that's why with the profits of our organization, we purchase gold and silver as monetary metals to be that reserve, to sort of move back towards that. As well as we just came out with this product last week where you can actually, the biggest problem with gold and silver is the premiums on like a 1 ounce coin are pretty high. But on a 1,000 ounce bar of silver or gold, the premiums are actually quite reasonable. But part of the challenge is nobody wants to lug around a 1,000 ounce bar or can afford a 1,000 ounce bar of gold or silver. And so what we've done within our organization is with our partner Silver Gold Bull, we've tokenized that 1,000 ounce bar. So you can actually purchase fractions up to 100ths of an ounce of that gold or silver and easily convert it back and forth between fiat and your store of value. So you want to be able to move seamlessly through from your store of value to your medium exchange, buying your cup of coffee very easily. And that's sort of what we've created within our organization. And we can see that the governments don't have a lot of palate for this because they lose their power. So basically we're starting it as a private organization and similar to what Texas is doing, basically saying, yeah, we're going back to tangible money. And this is the route that we've taken. And so if the federal government isn't going to do it, we're going to do it.
Okay, so you're essentially a small provincial bank that actually has gold and silver in its vaults.
Correct. Yeah.
Compared to the other ones that have nothing in their vaults. I'm very happy to hear that.
And I'd like to add in that if Alberta did this, okay, I think there would be like a sucking sound for money capital across the rest of the country. They would be fleeing to something that wasn't just fiat garbage and that actually had, a fractional reserve. And he and I both agree with this, in terms of the fractional reserve part. Like a history thing I just want to touch on for a second is, when Rome, for example, had its gold, silver, and copper coins, at one stage, the Roman Empire and its economy got to the stage where it was almost going into territories to get more mines because it wanted to have more, commodity type of thing for its currency. The Spanish Empire ran into the same thing, but then discovered Peru, and then all of a sudden the pieces of 8 were all across the world and causing inflation of their own type of thing, but were really sometimes the most common currency even in the United States during that time. And then the British Empire also had that type of situation where literally they were going into territories to make sure they had enough, of the commodities to back their pound sterling, etc. So I think that to have a fractional reserve and probably utilize these various commodities that I've talked about that are time tested is kind of the way to go. And I'm hard pressed to think of a better system. I don't know of one.
Yep.
All right.
You
I actually want sorry, Brett, you go ahead.
Oh yeah, and exactly the road Rob's going down here, and you've touched on there, Kevin. It's like this concept of using the blockchain or the crypto technology as well as hard assets in commodities and things like that. The technology is there, and we're capable of doing this type of thing, and it would, you know, build a very sound financial system.
I wanted to point something out here. You mentioned silver, gold, bull. I actually buy all of my gold and silver from silvergoldbull.com. I know that people are buying commodities now. Have a look at this, everyone. These are copper coins. They're not pressed with a face value, but they're pressing coins so you have an ounce of copper now. And I wanted to show you here, out of stock, out of stock, out of stock, 1 kilogram out of stock, 1 ounce copper bill out of stock, coins out of stock. People they're lapping it up. They're worried. I think that the average person in Canada is excessively worried about the Canadian dollar. I'm worried about it. Being here in Panama with the US dollar, I'm losing 30 cents on every dollar. It's really getting on my nerves, actually. So my thoughts are I'm going to have to start buying up vast amounts of gold and just pay the duties and get them shipped down here just to be able to have the same value. Anyway, I just want to point that out to everyone that the Canadians are catching on to the fact that the Canadian dollar is kind of useless. And if you look at XRP has tripled in just the last month. People are believing in other things. So, Brett, you being in banking, I'll ask you this one. The Canadian dollar, is it going to be around in 5 years?
I think, especially what the Trump administration is doing, I fear for the Canadian dollar really bowing under its own weight. We continue to and Rob, you're probably better versed in this, but effectively the Canadian dollar is backed by our resources of our country. Very significant oil and gas producer and exporter. If governments continue on down the path of this green agenda and continue to make it more and more difficult to get oil and gas out of the ground, our dollar is going to collapse on itself. With massive amounts of tariffs, our dollar is going to start collapsing on itself. You know, we're one of the least productive G7 countries that there is. And I think we might even be the worst productive G7 country that there is. You know, people are getting poorer within this country. We're less productive. And this all leads to a decline in the currency and the devaluation of the currency. So, and part of the challenge is this compounds on itself. As we lose ground against the US dollar, a lot of the products and services that we try and import are priced in US dollars. And so inflation starts to increase. And then they print more. And then inflation increases again. And then they print more. And you get into the super cycle of where it really perpetuates itself. And it's no wonder you're seeing things like hard assets out of stock, because people recognize this. And especially in Alberta, they're clawing and scratching over people to get into housing and in land and just put my money somewhere, because they don't really understand it, but it's just get it into hard assets, get it there. Right. It's really just unbelievable, frankly. So,
okay. So then I guess here's a real good question for you then, based on what you just said. Let's say that everyone in Canada takes all of their cash and buys hard assets with it. Let's imagine that everybody could afford a house. What would happen to the housing market if the Canadian dollar crashed and had to be replaced by the American dollar? Like, I know it's completely speculative, but it's a concern of mine.
Honestly, to stabilize things, I think that may be the direction that we have to go ultimately. If people lose faith in the Canadian dollar, it's still the worst the dirtiest shirt in the pile, but the U.S. dollars is still a safe haven, and rhetoric by the Trump administration only compounds on something like that. And in my mind, and we touched on it earlier, but the U.S. dollar will be the last dollar the last currency to fail. Everybody will currencies will collapse before the U.S. currency will fail. So I think
I'll add on that to say that, okay, let's talk this BRICS thing, for example. You've got Russia in the midst of a war that is not going well for them. Their currency, their gold reserves have gone down as a result. China has gone down in terms of their gold reserves by about 1,000 tons since a little over a decade ago, etc. And their economy is having its issues. India is going ahead and storing up and buying it's massing its gold reserves because it's worried where things are going to go. South Africa, has its own issues, type of thing. So I don't think that that's realistic. Like I know that China and Russia don't like having to deal in U.S. dollars and would prefer to get out from under that. But if I'm a banker in Frankfurt or Zurich or wherever, I'm not going to look at the BRICS thing and go, yeah, that's credible. I don't think that's realistic. The euro. Britain is looking to do the Brexit thing. They're kind of, going back and forth with regard to that. Germany has now elected, the Alternative for Deutschland in a serious way in the Bundestag. They're looking to get out because they don't want to take on the debts of Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, etc. You think about it with the euro, you've got 20 plus countries with 20 plus macroeconomic variables. So to figure out the value of the euro, you've got to have like 400 to 500 variables in the calculation. Like it's insane. I think Margaret Thatcher was right when she said that lowering the tariffs and creating a common market made sense, but that the lack of immigration controls and the common currency was not going to work out. I think she's right. It's just a matter of when. So I agree with Brett that the Americans with 8,000 tons of gold are still, and by the way, that's not the 20,000 tons of gold that the United States had in the 1960s, right before they delinked to gold in 1971 with Nixon. So they're not the currency they used to be, but it's still the best one of the bunch.
Well, I'd rather make that than Canadian, but still rather make Bitcoin than both. So that's me telling you the truth there. Well, a common thing also, gentlemen, that's told me all the time is that Canadians actually want the U.S. dollar in Canada. Now that Trump has won, Canadians are saying they want Trump to invade, take the country over, and bring the U.S. dollar into Canada. So it goes to show that with copper coins being bought up, with silver coins being out of stock in these places, I don't think anybody really has any faith in the Canadian dollar, period. Canadians are on my case all the time. I mean, I don't have enough hours in the day to get the bank accounts open here in Panama that we need to. So is there any way to rescue this country that's going down Canada, not Panama, Canada going down the toilet the way that it is?
Well, I think Brett's part of the answer, which is that you've got to have banks that are willing to say, hold on a second, we don't agree with what the government of Canada is doing. We don't agree with central bank digital currency. We don't agree with the regulations that they're doing to try to kill the oil and gas industry. And we've got to kind of start doing our own thing because they're frankly not acting in a responsible way. So we need to have people that vote with their feet, their dollars, and their checkbooks, and their mortgages and credit cards, and go toward institutions that are being financially responsible, like Brett, and say, we don't want to be part of this super controlling, overly regulated fiat system. We want to go back to a fractional reserve. And I have been working and sending out emails, for a while now, to try to encourage my fellow politicals in Alberta and across the country that I think Alberta is in the best position of any place to have our provincially regulated institutions move over to a fractional reserve system.
Well, that's a mouthful. That would take quite some time to disseminate. Brett, I mean, Rob here is saying that you're part of the solution. And I think that you are, by trying to get banks to maybe hopefully follow your lead and own hard assets. Now, let's talk about commodity-based banking for a second here. Is it possible, you think, to actually have an oil-backed currency as opposed to gold based on how much oil Canada has? And would it make sense?
Yeah, I think it probably is. And that would probably be the excuse of governments today is like, well, you know, our dollar is backed by the commodities. They're just in the ground, you know, which you know, easier said than done to actually get them out. So that's probably their reason why that they think that they can print to high heaven. And that's sort of why I'm more of a proponent of something like gold and silver, and you know, maybe what you do is you create a basket of commodities which it's based on, and you have a strategic petroleum reserve like the U.S. has, and it's actually drilled in tanks, in underground caves, whatever it is, and that's, you know, why typically people have used precious metals in the past, because oil can seep back into the ground, it can evaporate, wheat goes bad, you know, and there's these traits that the precious metals have that are unique, and it's similar to something like Bitcoin as well, because the thing is, it's a limited resource. It doesn't disappear as long as you don't lose your seed phrase and things like that.
Right.
But there is a certain amount of protection around that. Can we get back to a more sane environment? I think money is a great place to start. I think if you fix the money, a lot of the problems that you're seeing in today, the social disorder would disappear. The wars would start to disappear. Dysfunction would start to disappear. Yeah, and just sort of one thing I wanted to say, I got to correct myself. When I was talking about being close to the money, that's the Cantillon effect, not Triffin's dilemma. Sorry about that.
Gotcha. I'll have to look those terms up and do some reading.
You know, so J.P. Morgan said that gold is money and nothing else. And I would say that those other precious metals like silver and copper are good proximates and backup to gold. And then after that, just because Alberta produces so much oil, and because U.S. needs and has a strategic reserve, et cetera, and it's easy because, you know, we don't produce as much gold as we do oil, et cetera. It's an easy one for the Alberta government to have provincially regulated financial institutions go with. But any one of them is better than fiat garbage.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Now, here's a question just based on commodities. I mean, gold and silver backed currencies, for example. This is a very interesting point that was brought to my attention yesterday, and I don't have an answer. Sri Lanka is a hotbed for every precious stone imaginable. Regular diamonds, yellow diamonds, gold, sapphires, rubies, emeralds, everything. And you can pick them up like this and put them in a bag and buy them for a couple $1,000s. Now, why would that country not be utilizing gems as their commodity? Why would Canada not use oil? Why would, I guess, United Kingdom use, what do they have? Nothing. So, come on. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, precious gems are precious, right? Of course. But the problem is, let's say you take a guy like me, okay? How am I supposed to be able to ascertain the value of one diamond versus another? I'm just not that much of a connoisseur of diamonds or emeralds or rubies or what have you, right? The great thing about gold and silver is that when it's stamped and it says that it's 99% pure or whatever, as long as it's not China or somebody putting out some fake ingots or something like that, you hopefully know what you're getting. That's I think the difficulty with precious stones is that and as well there's industrial uses for silver and even for very fine gold in terms of electronics and various things. I guess there is for diamonds when it comes to like drill bits and stuff like that, but those probably aren't the ones that they're going to want to use as a currency, where they probably want the more refined stones, the ones with less inclusions in them and stuff. Whereas the industrial diamonds that are used for drill bits are much rougher and not as pretty. So that's my answer to that. But Brett may have some other wisdom to offer here.
Yeah, sure. And you really go back to the definition of money, whether it's fungible, whether that means whether you can just trade it, whether it's durable, whether it's, can stand up to a little bit of wear and tear, where it's portable, you can move it around, recognizable, which exactly what Rob's talking about there. I can't recognize one diamond from another, and as well as the stability. And, you take a look at that stability as a key trait of money. And I think it's safe to say that any fiat currency in the world today does not have that stability. And I think people recognize that. So,
something that Brett just said, like, I can't tell the difference between a diamond and a cubic zirconia. I mean, I'm sure there are. Yeah, I mean, jewelers could maybe, but I can't. So I think that's part of the problem.
Well, a cubic zirconia is something that I would deliberately go look for if I was going to put a ring on someone's finger. I'm not buying diamonds. Yes. You're right. You'd have to be trained to know the difference between the gems. I get it. I've just not been able to figure out why a country that has so many wouldn't use it. But now, something that I really wanted to talk about here, because mortgages in Canada, to get a mortgage or a loan in Canada is a nuisance. And it comes really from the fact that every time you walk in the bank, you say you want a loan. First question, by someone who's not born in Canada, I might add, who doesn't speak English. Oh, what's your address? We want your house. That's what they'll say. They're not wording it properly. They're asking for assetless. But it seems that Canada is almost 100% asset-based banking, whereas most of the rest of the world is capital-based banking. You got a good idea in the States, you get money, you go do it, and you make money on that money. In Canada, unless you have $1 million, you can't get a loan for $1 million. Brett, I'd love to get your take on that one, please.
Yeah, no, we're especially seeing some challenges. We're considered income-based lenders, and that's becoming very difficult, especially with the baby boomer generation retiring, because they don't have any income. And so when most of the financial institutions in Canada are income-based lenders, or collateral-based lenders, like you're talking about, it makes it extremely difficult to do a lot of type of lending. I would suggest it's a safer type of lending, but part of the challenge is, and we've seen this in Australia and especially in Canada, the housing prices have just gone up in their bananas with the cost of housing compared to the average wage of an individual. And it's not like that in the US. It's not like that in other areas of the world, where we're talking about 30-year, 40-year mortgages and that type of thing. And the youth in Canada cannot afford any housing. It's just unbelievable. So part of the challenge too is it just compounds on itself. So anytime there's a bit of a wobble in the housing sector, the Canadian economy is so dependent on it that the federal government is very quick to step in to solve problems and basically throw more credit at the system. So, but you're absolutely right. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and really you should look at hard collateral and capital to be able to do lending versus just passing around houses back and forth to each other, because it makes up a huge proportion of the GDP of Canada and Australia, right? So
I just wanted to touch on China for a second. Like, one of the reasons that the Vancouver housing stuff is just priced out of ridiculous is of course there's great weather and people want to live there even if they can't find a job there, whatever. But as well, if I'm in China and I have this ridiculously controlled, regulated, blah blah blah, digital yuan, I am going to own a property in Shaughnessy in Vancouver, even if I don't live in it and it sprouts up weeds, because that's way safer than having my money in Chinese digital yuan in banks in China. So that's part of the problem for Vancouver, is you've got all this Chinese money that is desperate to get out of this corrupt system.
And you're probably seeing a lot of that, even just what you do, Kevin. It's like Canadians recognize the corrupt system and they're looking for a better alternative down in Panama or Central America or South America, that type of thing, right?
Well, I've already found it for some Canadians. There are a number of companies down here. It took a little bit of negotiating to get it to happen, but if you have a credit card, like an Air Miles credit card, buy a condo on a credit card. Just tap it, get your Air Miles, get your points on it. But now you've got a concrete bank down here. And condominiums, actually, they really go up in value in Panama. In Canada, they're worth nothing. I wouldn't give you $5 for one. But here, I'd buy half a building worth of them and Airbnb them out and watch them grow in value. So you are correct. I am seeing Canadians and Americans, mostly Canadians though, putting their money down here where it's affordable. And I keep alluding to this in my show. My grocery bill is $30 or less per week. There are restaurants that have plates of food bigger than my head for $2-3. I'm stuffed. I can't even finish the meals. 50-cent coffees, 50, 60-cent donuts, $1 slices of cake, 6 inches across. It's easier to live in a place like this, much like I'm sure that Vancouver, as expensive as it is easier for Chinese folks, especially from the big cities, to live in. So yeah, we're seeing wealth moving out of crazy places into less crazy places all over the world. I just wish the Chinese folks knew that Canada is almost as crazy as China.
If Alberta had these fractional reserve, real solid asset banks, there would be all this money from the rest of the country that would be flowing in here trying to get away from the fiat system in the other places. It'd be awesome.
I would love it.
Yeah,
I would, and that would mean that Alberta should probably eventually have its own police force, get the Royal Canadian Mounted Police out because they serve no purpose, and have its own standing army. I think it'd be great. I would love that. Would be the Alberta that I would move back to in a heartbeat. Is to be there with its own currency and its own almost sovereignty.
The Switzerland of Canada.
It could be that.
I know.
Do you think that Daniel Smith's got the backbone for it?
Well, we're going to see. And sometimes, even if she doesn't have the backbone, if we can convince David Parker and Take Back Alberta and the Alberta Prosperity Project and all these other plethora of organizations that push for these things and get people elected onto the board for the party, maybe that can happen. We'll see.
Because it's worth it.
It
would be a very rich place. There would be jobs everywhere. And the other good part too is that I think the left wingers would finally realize that they don't belong in a commerce-based society. They'd leave. They'd go to Vancouver, go poison that place, and Alberta would just be bang on. Brett, get started. We want this to happen.
Yeah, well, I think banking is a small part of it, but you touched on some other things there. That the police is a problem, the legal system's a problem, taxation's a problem, education's a problem, justice is a problem. Like there is rot everywhere, so it's a big job to fix, and I hope we're on our way to being able to do that. So.
Yeah, somebody just commented here in Kick that when I said I pay $30 for a week of groceries, they just paid $30 for one whole chicken. Wow. And I'm not surprised. I'm truly not surprised. So if you're in Alberta, everybody, the only place I could recommend to you right now is, buy a cow, buy a whole cow. Should cost you about $2,400 to do that. It'll last a family of 5 a year and a bit. Buy whole cows. Forget retail. Retail is crazy. Brett, let's talk about Bow Valley Credit Union now, because let's push you a little bit here. You're the first CEO of any bank in Canada to ever speak to me, so thank you for that. And now that we've got you here, talk about what products you offer and why you're better.
Sure. Yeah, we touched on that big one that we just launched is the tokenized metals. We call it an e-metals account. And what the benefit of that is you can move back and forth seamlessly between your store of value and gold and silver into fiat currency. We're big proponents of Bitcoin, although we don't have a lot of products and services around that. We see the value proposition there. As far as I know, we're the only financial institution that will lend against gold and silver. So we consider it hard assets. And, that might even answer a bit of your question from earlier, Kevin, it's that truly is, that capital-based, commodity-based lending, when you can lend against your gold and silver. Our board of directors is aligned with our thinking, which is really important. Very freedom-minded and liberty-minded, entrepreneurial spirit. It helps a lot that we have an organization that's backed up with a staff and the board that are aligned in their thinking, and that there's problems in this world, and we're just trying to do our little part to help solve those problems for people. There's limitations on what we can do. You can't really ask us to break the law. We won't do that for you. But the thing is, it's a whole lot better than a lot of what you'd get at another financial institution out there. You can actually get somebody on the phone, which is pretty unique, instead of talking with somebody in Bangladesh. You're talking to somebody in Alberta. All our staff are Albertans. They have a vested Albertan mindset, and we've tried to do things a lot differently from other credit unions, and especially the big banks in Canada. So,
and you've got internet banking at your institution there.
Yeah, we're a full service financial institution, so pretty much everything that a bigger bank can do, we can do as well. So
the simple stuff: email money transfers, Visa, debit cards, all the above.
Yeah.
Huh, okay. Oh, and an app where you can take a photograph of checks and deposit them.
Yep. We have that. We have a lot of people that are still. We're big proponents of cash. We like people using cash. I think cash is going to continue to be very important. And so we are pretty adamant that we want cash services to be used as well, which, a lot of financial institutions seem to be moving away from it. And a lot of businesses too seem to be moving away from cash, which I think is pretty dangerous. So
I think it's ridiculous to do so. Absolutely. Now we got a great question here in the TikTok room. This is from Ian Brown. He's asking, will you loan against Bitcoin or other crypto?
We're not there quite yet. It's the loan to value would have to be pretty low, just because Bitcoin is pretty volatile. But we need a couple of things in place before we can be able to do that. We need to be able to house your Bitcoin with a custodian. So that way, if you can see the math behind that. If you have your Bitcoin and our fiat cash and disappear, that's a problem. So we almost need to have your Bitcoin with a custodian. That can be a big challenge for a lot of Bitcoiners. They want their keys, their coins in their possession. But we are looking at that and trying to go that direction. It might be a bit of an uphill battle with the regulators, but that's something that we are interested in.
Is there also, I'll follow up with my own question on this, because I've actually been pestering a lot of mortgage brokers on this. Can we get loans to buy Bitcoin and sit on the Bitcoin, pay the minimal amounts in cash? When the Bitcoin climbs, cash it in and pay off your loan and have the extra Bitcoin over top of it? Is there a way that a bank could actually lend people to buy crypto?
Yeah, it's called margining. You see it in the stock market all the time, and you just have to be prepared. And effectively, that's what we're doing with gold and silver in their loans too, where you're margining it, and basically you use it to buy more precious metals. But leverage cuts both ways. I think it's important for people to know that. If it is volatile like Bitcoin and goes down quickly, you might lose your Bitcoin. So,
yeah. Okay, that's a fair statement as well. But you're saying it is possible to get a loan and buy crypto with it?
Well, not through us yet, but and keep in mind, I'm a pretty firm mindset. I'm more in the Bitcoin maxi camp that all other coins are shit, with the exception of Bitcoin. So
I get it. I just I see where Ethereum has its uses with the millennial generation. They absolutely love to spend that back and forth, mostly on digital stuff. You ever notice how many 40-year-old virgins there are out there buying video game skins? That's stupid stuff with Ethereum, but it flows a lot.
Yep.
With the Russians making the announcement that they're considering XRP as a national currency, I guess would drive that up. But I do believe in Bitcoin. And that would be the first coin of choice that I would want ever if someone were to give me the choice of coins to have. So I agree with you on that. Bitcoin's the oldest. I think it's the least corruptible. And I think in 5 years, it's going to be worth $500,000 per coin. That's my personal thought on Bitcoin. If you have a different opinion, let's hear it.
Again, yeah, not financial advice, but I expect within 3 years, Bitcoin to hit 225,000 US, just based on some patterns that have happened in the past. So that's a pretty good risk return. Yet again, this is not investment advice, but yeah, it's got incredible potential. And just regarding XRP, you know, it's got a really, really interesting use case around a medium exchange that I think has the SWIFT payment system and a lot of the banks very concerned with, because a lot of the banks' margin, especially in the US, is made on foreign exchange. And with something like XRP, that basically disappears, right? So
I think XRP's popularity is increasing just because the number of transactions per second it can do on the worldwide networks. That's my explanation that was given to me on it. It was something like 44,000 per second, as opposed to Bitcoin, which was considerably less.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the specific statistics, but the medium of exchange use case is very interesting. I'm not so sure about the store of value case for XRP. Basically, what they've used is a cryptocurrency coin to fund the development of a payment rail system, is effectively what they do. So what's the value of that payment rail system? Right now, it's looking like it's worth about, say, 200 billion Canadian, which might be in the ballpark, but expecting XRP to go to 5,000, and that would imply that the XRP Ripple network would have an intrinsic value of 500 trillion. I think that's a little far-fetched. News to me about the Russians maybe using it as a store of value seems strange to me. The better use case for the Russians, I think, would be for a medium exchange, but that's just from what I understand. So,
all right, perfect. And Brett, a lot of people are asking who you are because they can't on TikTok and Kick, they can't see you. So go ahead, let everyone know who you are and how they can find you.
Oh, sure. My name is Brett Oland. I'm the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union. To get in contact with me, just go to Bow Valley CU, the letter CU, like in creditunion.com. If you're interested in getting in contact with me, you can just reach out to the contact section and get in contact with me. And happy to have a conversation with anybody. Unfortunately, we can only help people with their banking within Alberta. But yeah, happy to noodle around a few ideas if anybody's interested.
Can people move to Alberta and open an account?
Absolutely. Yep.
Can they open up corporations and run them out of Alberta and open up an account?
Yes, they can. So you can have a corporate, your corporation registered within Alberta, and we can open up an account for you. Yes.
Would you look at that? So get a hold of me and I'll help you get the corporation done. Brett's going to get your bank account going for you. Get your money out of the other provinces and spend it in Alberta. Yeah. The chicken wings are better and the women are prettier. There you go. Done.
It's a good point, though, because we've touched on it this whole time. Capital flows where it's treated best. And the thing is, all you have to do is beat everybody else. And I think that's what Alberta is doing effectively. It's like capital is going to be treated better in Alberta. Money and people will flow here.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. So everyone, that is BOW. It's not BULL. It is BOW. Bow Valley Credit Union. And I get annoyed because when I'm typing emails to you, Brett, I'm using the phone, I'm dictating it, and it always spells it Bull Valley. And I know I'm saying Bow. I know I'm saying Bow. It never gets, never spells Bow. Well, how long has the bank been around?
70 years, 70 years. We actually started in Banff, Alberta. Banff Park Savings is what it used to be called. We've seen a fair number of cycles, not as old as some of the bigger charter banks that have been around for over 100 years in Canada, but we've seen our fair share of licks. So,
yeah. Oh, and that's 2 words, guys. BOW, and the second word is Valley Credit Union. And just so everyone knows, I've got the biggest mouth in Canada. I have been declared the most controversial man in Canada. I didn't give myself that title. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and CTV and a few other junk outlets gave me that. And Brett,
it must be true if they mentioned it.
Oh, so. It has to be true for CBC. I agree. It has to be true. Brett Oland, the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union, is the first bank CEO in the country to be brave enough to talk to me on the phone first off, and then to come on my show. The others will not return my emails, my registered mail. They won't even reply to legal letters I send them. It's crazy. So I want to say thank you very, very much for having done this. Now, Rob, you put me on to Bow Valley back in, I would say, February of this year. We were talking about the fact that the Canadian federal bank charters were going to expire on June the 30th. And immediately after that show, my email box filled up. What should we do? So I began telling everyone, do a bank run. Get your money out of Canada. Just go grab all the cash you can. Then you came back on the show 3 more times. I said the same thing publicly this time. Do a bank run, do a bank run, do a bank run. That got back to Trudeau and the powers that be. So they extended the Bank Act 2 more years. So I want to say again, thank you, Rob, for being a part of that. And Canada, you're welcome. You're welcome for 2 more years to get your money into something of value. Now, Brett, I got to ask you this. You're provincially chartered, but what happens to Canada in 2.5 years now when the federal bank charter expires? The Bank Act expires. When the federal banks no longer have a charter, what is going to happen to the Canadian dollar? Go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important to note that this has been around since about 1871. The Bank Act. It always had this clause in it that they were going to review the Bank Act every 10 years, and then they moved it to every 5 years, and then they moved it to every couple of years, and they were supposed to actually review it in the middle of COVID, and I think it was 2022, and then they pumped it out to 2025, and then as you suggest, I think they put it out to 2027. I haven't done enough research on it to see if it's nefarious. It's definitely something lingering over people's heads. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, they may be proposing to move towards something like a central bank digital currency in 2027. They are woefully unprepared to do something like that. So we may have a little bit more runway than something like 2027. But I'm not much of a fearmonger on this one, just because I just don't think there's a viable alternative that they can move to at this point. So
my worry is if they get rid of Trudeau, and I would like to see Trudeau lose abysmally and Pierre Poilievre pick up a ton of seats and get a majority government. But if they swap out for somebody like Mark Carney, who is like hook, line, and sinker on central bank digital currency and green economy stuff and everything else, and has all sorts of, plans with regard to forcing people down that road of switching people out of oil and gas into, whatever. I think that's a huge problem, because Carney is a slicker salesperson for central bank digital currency than Trudeau is, and that is dangerous.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. He's smarter. He's better versed. He used to be a central banker of the Bank of Canada. He went over to England and was the governor for the Bank of England. And if that doesn't scare you, nothing else would. There's constant ties back to the monarchy, and the saying goes, all roads lead back to London. A lot of the problems we see in the world today are based out of that little island, and don't let them fool you. There's a lot of trouble that England can cause, and you see it today, and they're the ones that are pushing Russia into World War III. They're the ones sending missiles over to Ukraine. They're the ones saying, "Oh yeah, we need to liberate the Ukrainian army," and these things are not good. And I thank goodness that there's people behind the scenes, that it seems at the Department of Defense in the U.S. that have some sane minds and are not letting this thing escalate. So.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, with Britain's proximity to Russia, why provoke? Yeah, it's just a tank drive away for the Russians.
My guess is not my work, but someone called Alex Craner's work. Suspicion is that the UK banking system is about to collapse. The sovereign debt is they're effectively bankrupt, and so as they've done in a few other times in the past, mainly World War I and World War II, when the country goes bankrupt, they take you to war, and I think we're seeing that again, where effectively Europe is bankrupt, specifically the UK, and they've run out of options, so they want to force a war on people. That's my opinion, but
I want to point out, in Canada's case, like I said, we had the beautiful free banking system operate in this country from 1817 until 1914. It's not a coincidence that ended at the beginning of the First World War, and it's not a coincidence that they brought in the Federal Reserve in the United States after Pierpont Morgan passed away, and with the introduction or whatever of the First World War. So wars they create terrible banking scenarios, right? They debase currency, they cause inflation, all that type of stuff, right? So because of the First World War, we lost the most beautiful free banking system the world had ever seen.
That's an absolute shame and a crime. And I am concerned. If you're telling me the United Kingdom is broken, this is the only way out for them is to cause trouble and a war. Uh-oh, look out. Now, here's hoping that Uncle Trump is going to stop that nonsense. But he's only one man. So we can't put all of our faith in just one guy. Now, Rob, this is for you. Speculation on after the election next year. Should Poilievre win a majority government, will there actually be an improvement in the economy, or can we just expect more of the same?
Well, there's no doubt that he's going to be better than Justin Trudeau. Like, it's hard to be worse than Justin Trudeau, right? Mark Carney might be worse than Justin Trudeau because he's just as much of a globalist with a nefarious kind of green agenda and smarter at selling it, right? So, but I have no doubt that, Pierre is going to want to cut taxes. I have no doubt that he's going to want to, put limits on the growth of government, et cetera, which is all stuff that needs to be done to try to get our debt situation under control. So I have no doubt he's going to be better. I mean, is he going to be, as strident as maybe some of us would like? It's like when Harper came in. A lot of us were Hoperites, hoping that he was really going to tackle this stuff, and yet the bureaucracy grew, and we didn't get, a defunding of the CBC or various things that many of us were hoping for. So, it reminds me of when Milton Friedman was being interviewed one time, and this interviewer ran through a list of government departments, and Milton Friedman wanted to get rid of education. He wanted to get rid of a whole bunch of departments in the federal government. Now, if a president actually did that, oh my word, like Milei is doing in Argentina, like that's phenomenal stuff. Is Pierre going to go as far as Milei in Argentina, or what some of us anticipate Trump's going to do? I don't know. Time will tell. Yeah.
Okay. So, Brett, now more of a fun question for the audience at home. For yourself as the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union, which is a bank. What advice do you give to anybody in Canada who wants to get a mortgage or a loan? What should they do? How do you prep for a meeting with banks? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, it's important to just sort of have your financial affairs in order. It's unfortunately for a lot of the youth, they've gotten themselves into trouble in the past, through bad creditors, that type of thing. It's important to, especially in Canada, to keep those credit scores as high as you can. Make sure you're paying off those phone bills. Make sure you're not in too many credit cards, that type of thing. Important to do that and constantly worry about your credit score. Big down payments are important. Some advice. It's difficult sometimes, but I've heard of people with 30 or 40-year mortgages. You're paying pennies down on something like that. Probably the minimum I'd recommend is a 25-year mortgage on something like that. Be honest with your banker. Never a good start to a relationship if you're dishonest. Big down payment as you can possibly manage. There are insurance programs for housing. It's Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac in the U.S. In Canada, it's Sagen or CMHC that can help with people with less of a down payment, but you do end up paying a lot more insurance premium on your house overall. So hopefully that's a few tips that can help people.
Well, you brought up a good point. Credit score. Is there anything that you could advise young males, young women out there on how to build a good credit score? I mean, one of the tricks that I used to pull when I was younger is I'd get a credit card. I'd go to the bank machine, take out a cash withdrawal, 5 days later, pay it off, repeat the process, keep doing this. And then I also got a bank loan when I was 17. I got a bank loan with my mother's help for $2,000. Stuck it in a coffee can, made the minimum payments, 3 months later, paid it off, got a loan for $4,000, and I kept upping it. And I was eventually able to get credit. Would that still work today? People getting short loans and paying them off?
No, absolutely. And I recommend people not overdo it. So don't get a $15,000 credit card when you can only afford a $500 credit card. And you don't need to make it huge. It's like, it doesn't say credit score with, using $500 credit. It basically just has a score out of 900. So, but you're absolutely right. You want to pay on time with interest. Don't miss those payments. Specifically with the younger generation, they're looking at phone bills because everybody seems to have a phone bill these days. Don't miss those payments on those phone bills. Those ding you pretty hard. Any utilities pay off, and important to get set up properly. Not that you ever need it, but build that cash reserve, potentially a small line of credit. You don't need, like you say, not anything silly, just $2,000 would probably do it. But honestly, keep that so you're not drawing into it, and debt can get you in a lot of trouble if you're not careful. So try and get out of debt as soon as you can as well. So.
Yeah, you said a lot of stuff I agree with there, and some of the stuff I knew and some I didn't. So I think what I'm hearing here is maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe we should open up corporations and put our phone bills, our electrical bills, internet bills, everything into the corporation instead. Because, I can't see putting a power bill, a gas bill, an internet bill in your name. I don't think that builds credit if you pay it on time. I just think it actually removes or lowers your credit score if you don't pay it. Am I right or wrong on that one?
Yeah, to some degree, you're right, because the thing is, the more credit pulls that you actually have can actually decline your credit score. So if you go to the phone company and the utility company and a bank and a mortgage broker and all these companies all at the same time, and they pull a credit bureau on you, it can actually decline your credit score just because the algorithm thinks that you're going out to try and grab money wherever you can. So it's important not to do it all at once. But it's not anything I've heard of, but it's not a bad suggestion of sort of de-risking yourself by putting stuff in a corporation that could effectively have a crappy credit score, and you get off having a good, clean one. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I started doing that almost 20 years ago. There has not been a bill in my name in 20 years in Canada. Just because I got tired of finding out that there was the possibility. Sometimes you just forget. You forget you had something, and it goes into what they call an R9, and your credit score just drops. Yeah, it's possible to forget. So, yeah, I would say do the corporation route as well. Okay, so Rob, you were a member of Parliament for 18 years. You had, unfortunately, the opportunity many, many, many times to be 5 feet away from Trudeau and so on. Your experience in politics is absolutely unbelievable. Could you maybe in our last 9 minutes here give your thoughts on what Canadians can do to protect themselves and their families? Please go ahead.
Well, if you can pay in cash and keep cash alive, that's a good idea, because if you get to a point where 90 some approaching 100% of transactions are done digitally, it makes it so much more compelling for those who want to go to a central bank digital currency to advocate for that. So if you want to keep cash, use it. As well, I mean, I certainly have switched out to using provincially regulated financial institutions as much as I can, because the federally chartered banks will just jump to the tune of whatever the CRA and the government wants, whether it's truckers or what have you. I think all the stuff that Brett was talking about your debt scenario, is good advice, and I think that people have to worry about where interest rates are going to go. I expect what's going to happen is you're going to have a yo-yo effect on interest rates, where the government wants to appear that it's doing something with regard to inflation, so they'll hike rates, and then because they can't afford to pay their own rates with regard to their own debt, they will take it back down, especially when they see it's killing the economy or causing unemployment, etc. So we're seeing a bit of that right now, where they hiked up rates and they're bringing them back down aggressively because they realize it's going to have a strangling effect on the economy and on their own borrowing. So I think because of Trudeau putting $1 trillion into the national debt, there's no way you're not going to have inflation and the government periodically spiking rates. So that's going to be tough on borrowers. So there's a number of things like that. And of course, I can't stress enough what Brett's trying to do, which is to go back to a fractional reserve and to advocate that banks do the responsible thing, even if the government wants to do the irresponsible thing and carny with a central bank digital currency. I think we need to move back to a fractional reserve. In Alberta's case, I've advocated this, where at first you can make it 1%, and then you take it to 2%, and you take it to 3%. Make it easy for people to meet the hurdles, but to go back with having something that backs up currency as opposed to the fiat we have now, it's a mistake. Canada had a great system going, and we've abandoned it.
It's a shame, but I do appreciate you coming out here and telling us all of that. And Rob, we are always going to have solutions here. Rob, how do people find you online if they have any questions for you?
I'm on Facebook. I'm the guy in the silver billy Stetson cowboy hat. robforblue@gmail.com is my most used email address, type of thing.
Perfect. Rob, wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for being here. And hey, Canada, you're welcome to Rob for extending with me that Bank Act for 2 more years. Great to see you, and I hope we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Take care. Okay, Brett, got me here for the last couple of minutes. Again, I am thrilled beyond reproach to have you here. You're the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union. You've answered a lot of great questions tonight for people. So please blog yourself. People should be banking with you. You are someone who decided to come on this show, and I represent what we'll say the common man and what the common man expects out of their government, which I think is too much because the government's not prepared to do anything. I just want to say thank you for coming out here, being brave enough to talk to the common man through this show. So please tell everybody how they can reach you and how they can make money with you. Go. Just plug it.
Sure. Yeah. It's a lot simpler if you are an Alberta resident, and you can just go to our website, bowvalleycu.com, and nose around a little bit and see what we're up to. I think people are going to be really interested in this eMetals account, where you can basically keep your store of value within gold and silver, but easily transact into fiat currency back and forth, or borrowing against your gold and silver. You can get a hold of me through that website. I am about to start to get a whole lot more active on X, Brett_Oland, at Brett_Oland on X. There isn't a lot of activity there now, but we're about to ramp that up a lot more, just with some little insights and videos of snippets and things like that. And yeah, happy to have conversations with people, even if you're not able to bank with us. Maybe you've got some concerns about what to do financially, and we can help maybe navigate you in the right direction, or thinking about a few things that maybe you want to think about. So.
Yeah. And again, everyone, if you open up a corporation in Alberta and you run it out of Alberta, you can have a corporate bank account with Brett Oland and Bow Valley Credit Union. I'm sorry, I'm from Mississauga in Credit Valley. I get those words mixed up sometimes. Wow. God, I have had such a great time tonight. Brett, thank you for answering all my emails. Thank you for talking to me on the phone. Thank you for passing off all the banking information privately in our conversations. And thank you for being here tonight. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this type of thing is really important. So thank you for hosting, and let's hope we can build a better world sort of a little bit at a time. So
you and I are on the right track with that. And we'll do this again soon, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Brett. Have a great night. Take care. Right. What an incredible pair of guests we had tonight. I mean, this is something I've wanted to do for quite some time. And I'm eternally grateful to both gentlemen for being here. And for my American friends who are watching this, I'm a Canadian citizen, born in Toronto, raised right next door in the city of Mississauga, which is an 80-minute drive to Buffalo. I've lived in the United States for 4.5 years of my life. I currently live in Panama. I've been to 12 countries, been to a few war zones in that time. Used to be a full-time journalist, and now I do taxes for Canadians and Americans full-time. I've had a lot of fun traveling the world, but there's also been a lot of heartache and a lot of pain, because Canada is just not an easy country to navigate. Hasn't been for quite some time, but with gentlemen like Rob and Brett coming out to help you navigate a little bit better, I know that you have a few more answers than you had before you got here. And don't forget, everybody, I buy corporate debt. That is correct. If you have a corporation in Canada or in the United States that has tax debt, regional tax debt, sales tax debt, GST, HST, any debts whatsoever, including corporate credit cards, I will buy the company from you. I will take all of your debt away. You get to go right back to zero and start over. Get a hold of me on my website right now at KevinJJohnston.com. I've been studying Canadian tax law for 40 years. I've been studying American tax law for all of this year. God, I know all the tricks now. Let's put your money where it belongs, and that is back in your pocket. Call Brett, put your money in his bank, where at least we know it's going to be safe. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show that runs every single Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on freedomreport.ca. I love you all, and good night.